Is it your first time here in Arles?
No, not the first time in Arles, but first time at LUMA, to see, the experiment.
The experiment.
Yeah, and it's, of course, because LUMA is a big experiment, it's great because Prouvé was really an experimental guy. I mean, all of these are experiments. They are not finished, they're not complete, they are not the end. For him, everything is always just beginning.
And talking about Prouvé, how did you discover this architect? I know that you're not really into naming him architect.
No, I think he's architect.
But how did you discover him?
I don't know. I think about Prouvé is a little bit mysterious figure. Any architect you mention the name Prouvé, they go like, oh, Prouvé. But actually, architects are a little bit scared of this guy because they are not so sure, for example, why these things are so beautiful. Look at this. It's too beautiful. Huh? Everything about it. So if you're a fancy architect, of course you say, yeah, I make beautiful things. Look at my beautiful window. But Prouvé says, no, I'm not making beautiful things. I'm solving problems. I'm kind of creating new conditions of construction, new conditions of industrialization. I care a lot about the family that will live in this house. I want this house very cheap, very easy to make. Just make a concrete base and then this is a kit of parts, bang. 3 people can make it in 7 days, easy, the whole thing. So I don't care, it's so beautiful, but then it's so beautiful. Then you have all these architects, they spend their whole lives, they want to make beautiful things, but they can't compete with this. So Prouvé is always what you could say a not quite architect. He's close to architecture, and there's a lot of jealousy and confusion about him. So of course I love not quite people. Like in your life, not quite people are the ones that make a difference.
I understand.
And so if you ask me, I don't know, but Prouvé, once you become interested, it's really contagious and there's no cure. In the world of design, this is one of the biggest names. In the world of architecture, okay, it's a little bit, he's very attractive but confusing. In this, he's like Buckminster Fuller. Again, very experimental, very crazy, very amazing, but not quite architecture. Conrad Waxman, again. And these are people, all of whom thought, okay, and architecture should be industrialized, should be manufactured like anything else in our society. And every modern architect said, architecture should be modern, which means should be like a machine, should be like an airplane. An airplane is like a house on wings. No? You need a place to sit down, to eat, to go to the toilet. You need everything from a house, even a place to talk. But it has to be very light, otherwise the plane will crash. It has to fly. Right? Every architect said, yeah, modern architecture should fly. Le Corbusier wrote a book called Aircraft. But with this guy, it really flies. Like every element is so light that you can put it in a plane, like his most famous houses, the Maison Tropicale. It's put in an airplane, it goes to Africa. And then if your elements are so light that it can be in an airplane, the resulting architecture, when you put the kit together, is like this. It's almost not there.
I understand.
Like this is the great dream of modern architecture, that we would just flow into the space. There are no divisions of the space. This is a system, so this could go for 1 kilometer, same, bang, bang, bang. This is kind of, you see 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter, but then it's a group of 8, then another group of 8, then another group of 8, and this could go.
It's an endless process.
And it's a school. So what's a school, right? It's a place where young minds will invent something new, will learn it from the past. And so this is a laboratory. And you can say that for Prouvé, his studio was a laboratory. And what he was making was a laboratory. Also, for me, this is a bit like an airline hangar. Like an airline hangar is like a shelter for an airplane. The airplane can live there for a little bit. Maybe you fix it, maybe you work on it. But finally, the most important thing is that the plane flies out. So what if a school is like an airplane hangar for little kids that are becoming, and then they're going to fly into the world? Wouldn't you like that your children fly into the world, not, on the ground? So here you have with Prouvé this complete confusion of a dream of an architecture that could fly, for people that should fly, using technologies of industrialization and so on that should fly. But still, in the end, it's really folded metal. Like this. This is. You hear it, huh? It has no weight. It's very light.
It's a very light.
It's folded
element,
It looks very simple, but actually the joins you see welded here and here and here is actually very sophisticated, very complex. You see that it gets, as it comes down, it gets thinner. This is typical Prouvé. So it's only the dimension it needs to be. If it needs to get narrower, then fine. So he makes this very simple element. All the strength of this building is coming from this. And this is not very heavy. So his architecture is almost ready to be taking off. You know, normally with architecture you hold the building up like this. This is different. It's almost the architecture is so light.
That's a flying building.
He has to hold it down. This is the main purpose of this is to stop the building from flying away. Right. So it's this idea. And now, if I'm a child in this space, the space makes no pressure on me. The space says to you, okay, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I understand. That's why you explained me earlier that this exhibition is about one idea more than, you know, it's like 12 times the same idea, but with different declinations.
So it's a school, so it's also a house, it's also an office, also a factory. You could say that Prouvé was trying to design hospitality. You know, and hospitality is like a kind of a generosity. You welcome the stranger into your house, but also you welcome the fact that the stranger is strange and might do something unexpected. This is also why it's a kind of a hanger. Something might happen in here that we don't know. And Prouvé is saying this should be the same of your house at home, that when you are with your family, who knows what will begin there. So here's this double move. One is just to give you a very light shelter, very minimal, very cheap, very easy, very mobile. Maybe your house arrived on the back of a truck, and there was a kit of parts, and you put it together. And then the house makes a very small pressure on you, not much, keep away the wind and the rain, and then you should invent. So he's a laboratory guy, his own studio. He thinks of all the people that work with him as a family. He says they should all be shareholders in the company. Very sort of clear socialist argument. We are workers together. Together we will invent something. What will we invent? We will invent something that allows other people to invent things. So really it's about designing generosity. And
but talking about like hospitality, when you see a building like the Centre Pompidou, that's quite interesting. Talking about like the posterity of what is the heritage of an architect like this, you know?
Well,
you really think about like this building is really something about generosity and hospitality, and I think the success of the Centre Pompidou is almost like a legacy from Jean Prouvé. No?
I completely agree with you. Of course, Prouvé was the president of the jury that selects this project. And this project by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, you know, the very first scheme, the floors move up and down. So we know it being like a machine, very flexible. Who knows what the future of art is? So we need just a space a machine for But this first idea that the floors move, it was exactly based on the Fun Palace of Cedric Price, the most brilliant Cedric Price, the most brilliant project. Again, a kind of hospitality. The Fun Palace was a university of the people, a very big industrial space. And that project of Cedric Price exactly based on the Maison du Peuple of...
Maison du Peuple, yes.
Is
the origin of
Prouvé.
Is in the kind of origin of the Centre Pompidou.
So you could say Prouvé, Prouvé is the architect of Pompidou. No question. And by the way, I think if you talk to Richard or to Renzo, they will say that's true. Actually, they probably will say, no, he would have done it better than us, but we try to do our best. So Prouvé has this magical quality. He has absolutely affected architecture. Even if the architects don't understand what this power is, if you have an exhibition like this, maybe it's the only way to understand, because all of these buildings are genetically connected. It's the same project. It's not you know, this is a school, okay, and this is an emergency house. And yeah, the school looks a little bit more luxurious. It's made of metal because after the war you can use metal.
There was something possible.
During the war you can use a little bit of metal for the structure. So we see, for example, the basic idea of the metal structure, but mainly you're going to do the panels with wood. But these are the same project. You know, it's the same. So in a way, and of course it's amazing to have them here in this huge space. You see, for example, this big gantry crane. So basically, one big volume with a huge gantry crane, so you can move any object here.
Yeah.
When Cedric Price does the Fun Palace, it has a big gantry crane like this. So with Prouvé, you have the idea that what's beautiful about a factory is a place where you make things, and therefore it has to be open. Again, it's a little bit like a hangar, except this is a building, a house, not an aircraft. But originally, this was a place for making trains. So
that's quite interesting, the parallel between the two.
Yeah, the sort of spiritual link between Prouvé, who thought we should make houses in factories, and the idea of making a train in this factory. And a train, again, is just a house on the tracks. You know, of course, people like Le Corbusier and others are arguing since the 1920s, we should industrialize housing, we should build housing in aircraft factories. Exactly, and we should build like an aircraft. But actually, Le Corbusier never built a house in an aircraft factory. He dreamed about it. Prouvé did. So Prouvé is like a modern architect who believed in modern architecture so much that he actually did it. Whereas Le Corbusier, he didn't really do it. For example, Le Corbusier's most famous house, the Villa Savoie, is a hand masonry house covered with stucco and then painted white. And he would stand beside the house and say, this is an airplane. And it sits up on legs. But this is an old technology.
Yeah, I understand.
You know?
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
With Prouvé, Conrad Waxman, Buckminster Fuller, they made, you know, something like an airplane. So I think it's a very amazing guy, Prouvé.
And have you ever seen a show with so many buildings like this?
No, it's impossible. Firstly, it's impossible because, well, let's say it's only possible with Prouvé because precisely Prouvé is an industrialized architect. So every house can be taken apart and made again. Every house is a kit set. So it's only possible with Prouvé, and it seems to me it would be really unusual if these houses would ever be together again. This is like a family reunion.
Yeah. No, it's when you do like a show from a painter and you have like all the paintings all together.
Yes.
You know, once again. Yeah. You know, you can see the connections between the different paintings in a way that's the exact same thing. And it's not. It's not easy. Even like to find just like the.
But I agree with you. But let's say it's Yves Klein, and it's only the blue. Let's imagine that Yves Klein only ever made the blue. Of course, that's a huge exhibition because he did a huge amount of blue. Prouvé only ever did this. So in other words, he's a one project architect, and then you have a retrospective of one project. And so it's exactly like you say. It's like when you get together everything that an artist did, and then you look at it and you go like, oh, the artist did actually one idea, many variations.
Yeah, with all those variations.
Yeah. And that's why if you're a fetishist, you zoom in and you see every little detail. So the way he's coming around the corner, right? So they don't have the money for the metal, but we need something in the corner. So he has to hold the panels. So he invents this joint. And Prouvé is the expert on the way you join one thing to another. In a really good joint, like if I join my hands like this, you don't see the joint. The actual joint is hidden. You just see the two hands. So with all of his architecture, it seems so simple. You go like,
yeah, that's the thing. Everything looks so simple, but more you go into his own work, that then you find out that you know he never stopped, you know, thinking about how to make the process better and better.
Yeah. So let's look inside this house, for example. Okay, it's just a box.
It's a box. Yeah.
We can smell it, right? We smell the house. Of course, the box can be divided with many different walls. There have to be a toilet, a bathroom, bedroom, and so on. But it doesn't matter. You decide where the walls go. But for this whole box to be just a box, it takes the brilliance of this system. So the real structure of the house is here in the middle, in a way holding the house down, not holding it up, but holding it down on this floating floor. And we don't see anything complicated, right? Maybe this is the most complicated thing we see, right? And it is true that it's interesting that with Prouvé, the structure becomes a kind of sculpture in the middle of the house. With most architecture, the structure is this sort of secret thing that's
that you don't want to see.
You don't see. Here it sits in the middle of the house.
Yeah.
But if you look at his drawings of this piece of metal, if you just look at the actual drawing of it, it's more complicated than a typical house. In other words, with architects, normally you see complex plan, and the house is saying to you, I'm interesting, I'm interesting, I'm interesting. But actually the details of the house are very simple. Here, the details are very complicated, very original, very crazy and very inventive, but the effect of the details is incredibly simple. So he's always saying, it's just a box, no big deal, but it's a really big deal. And he spent his whole life, like there are about 30 different versions of this portal, so-called portal frame. So he had like these three main...
Same idea, but 30 versions.
30 versions of the same thing. This one, it starts as a V, and I think the only reason he makes it like this is because, of course, if there's a V, then we'll lose a little bit of space. So I think, for me, more beautiful is the V, but he goes like this.
With the line, he looks more like...
So it really looks like the drawing a child would do of a house. Floor, roof, walls, and nothing else. But then to make this very simple drawing, there is all this sort of secret knowledge. And this knowledge comes from the fact that he was really a master craftsman in metalwork.
So who would be the equivalent of Jean Prouvé today? With this kind of, like specific way of thinking, using the same idea and trying to make it better days after day?
I have no idea. What a good question.
Or is there any...
It would be somebody working with computers, because computers, somebody who works with a computer today is like the craftsperson of the past. In fact, there's a big tradition of this. Even Le Corbusier, for example, who thinks of himself, of course, as the world's most important architect, and maybe he is, he's not trained as an architect, he's trained as a decorative artist, right? And his teacher is Peter Behrens. Peter Behrens was a painter who in 1901 says, I could be an architect. So there's a long tradition of not quite architects who, because they are not architects, they can see architecture in a new way, they transform it. Then you get Prouvé transforming. So to answer your question, we have to look for who is not an architect, but who's a not quite architect today.
Who's not an architect, who could be an architect and working with this, in
some kind of laboratory with some kind of material, generating new potentials. You see it clear in this one that the structure is a sculpture. It's sort of like he almost turns a traditional house inside out. And for him, the idea that he puts this angle. So he makes always a box. And maybe you are allowed one trick with every box. One
trick.
This is the trick.
That's the trick of the.
And he's afraid to be an architect, so he's afraid to look too much like he's making something interesting. So he's trying to make this like a technical window. This is.
He doesn't want to make this too apparent.
Because so if this glass, for example, was vertical, pretty much will do the same thing with nature, like you say, right? You have the nature and so on. So this is for him almost like he's drinking some champagne. This is a moment where he's having some fun, and he's saying, "I will give you a feature. It's an angled window, no decoration, no ornament, then bolted to the concrete. Way it goes, it becomes like a Gothic cathedral." But no representation. It's not like there are no trees, no angels, just this
structure itself.
In the early decades of the 20th century, architects fell in love with these spaces, and they say like, this is really beautiful. This is more beautiful than a medieval cathedral, and this is like the truth. Can we make an architecture for the truth? It's you do the most you can with the least materials, the most hospitality for the least resources. In a way, that's the dream of modern architecture. But most modern architects are not very modern. Right? Most modern architects, they still try to make a kind of a theatrical statement. In other words, they make a statement about machines, but they don't make a machine. With Prouvé, maybe he's just naive, maybe he's honest, maybe he's direct, maybe he doesn't have imagination, he just makes the machine.
Yeah, it's all about the machine.
He just makes the machine. And when he makes the machine, he realizes it's not so simple to make a machine. The machine is actually extraordinarily complex. Machine is like a living organism. Each piece of the machine has to respect all the other pieces of the machine. They must fit together perfectly. And so, in a way, he disappears inside the mechanism. And when he comes back out again, miracles. Like, look at this one.
Yeah. But that's even more like a spaceship, than a
But look at this.
Plane.
So, you know, we are used to the idea that that in architecture the column is strong. You know, I'm strong. I am a column. When people want to pretend that they're strong, they pretend to be a column. Right? They stand up like this. I'm strong. And we think of people who are weak as being full of holes, perforated, and so on. He takes the column and fills it with holes because he's saying, look, I don't need this metal. I don't need this piece of metal. It will be perfectly strong without this. And then he says, okay, now I have a column that's strong but full of holes, and I make a ventilation system. So he makes the column into a machine. So the column no longer is just standing there holding up the roof. The column is also making the air move through. This is really hardcore, radical. So when somebody is somehow without imagination, in a traditional sense, another kind of imagination pops up. This is one of the most radical gestures. Even for me to call it a column, it's a little bit insulting. You know, and then when you multiply it, no hierarchy. He's also a very anti-hierarchical architect, and he has just learned this new trick of the crutch. So he has again the metal structure, but he discovers he doesn't need it on the other side, because if I make this, the roof is going to be perfectly strong. So he realizes, like a crutch, you only need, like a person with a bad leg needs only one, then the rest of the roof is coming from this. So all the strength of the building comes down in this one place. And as a result, you have a beautiful room, empty, more or less. Only 3 points where the structure is in the middle. Every angle determined by the forces, everything bolted together. Columns are also ventilation systems. This is sort of like, the dream of a glass box. The dream you can see with Mies van der Rohe and others, but no one does it like this. This is also why architects are very jealous of Prouvé.
I see
when they see this, it's just a problem.
Yeah, because it's just a column, and the design makes everything. It's just like a line, but it's
most
also
architects, they see this and they go like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
So he's always thinking. So he's a thinker. So that's interesting that a guy who says, I stay in the workshop, I stay close to the material, I want to make things, I don't just dream about things, I really make them. He ends up thinking, he's a thinker, he's an intellectual. So he would never say that. He will say, I'm just a craftsperson, but he's really, really an intellectual. Plus his vision is about society, who has access to housing, who doesn't. He does his first projects are really for like airplanes. Then they are for the people, like the maison de people, the
maison du peuple, right?
the house for the people. Then it's like the house for the people with no houses, emergency houses. Then it's the house for the military who are having to travel for war. They are in one place today and another place tomorrow. Then it's the house for the migrants. Then it's the flying schools for the people who are surviving the war but have no money and don't have a school. Then it goes always like this. So he has a very, very strong humanitarian.
Yeah, that's really part
impulse.
of his.
And your show really celebrates this, I think.
Yeah, I think it was also part of the idea, like celebrating this idea of this very, specific aspect of Jean Prouvé.
Yeah.
So now we are like in the front of this.
We see. So we see three layers.
Construction from Gehry.
Yeah. So we see a building of Prouvé. Actually, it's a factory building. For Fehrenbau. So we see a factory building in front of a factory building for making trains, which is in front of the Gehry building, which is being born. So this is like a kind of a fetus, kind of evolving animal. And in a way, I think that the Gehry building is not a building.
And in what way it's not a building?
Well, if you look at this, which part of a normal building do you see?
None, actually.
None, right?
Yeah.
So it's really not a building. I think that's great that Frank can do not a building. And I think the inside is extremely interesting of what he's making. It's anyway, looks like one tower, but maybe it's more like 4 towers that are interlocking. So he's making a space that's very unique, and it will be good as long as it's not a building. So if he has been if he's good enough to not make a building, great. But Prouvé, in front of it, it's a difficult challenge because Prouvé is like a stupidity reduction machine. Basically, Prouvé gets rid of all the bullshit. And so in a way, to put this bullshit detector in front of Gehry is tough for Gehry. And I think he's surviving very well.
It is, actually.
I think he's really surviving very well. And I don't think that Gehry or LUMA needs anyone to say whether the building is good or bad. But I think the best thing it can be is not a building, but something a little bit confusing. And to enter that building is to rethink. You are forced to have a different idea. What could be art, what could be culture, what could be society, but could also be some kind of factory. In other words, a laboratory in which something else is happening. And I think
this is all about what the foundation is looking for.
So if the dream is a kind of laboratory dream, so if LUMA wants to be a laboratory, I think that Prouvé is such an intelligent way to begin, because this is an absolutely laboratory person. Gehry always had a very strong appreciation for artists, and particularly artists of the 70s. And every time I see his work, I see it again and again. He's still thinking what they were thinking, So I think, these are different worlds, totally different worlds. And then there's this kind of prophylactic layer of the 19th century, keeping them apart. But I think when good designers do their stuff, it's like music. You feel these different kinds of music.
Good responses.
Yeah. And to be honest, we will not really know what Gehry is doing for another 50 years. Maybe just now we're starting to develop some understanding of Prouvé. So I think it can be kind of tragic for an architect, contemporary architect, because they are always explaining their work and always having idiots explain their work, and always the magazines want to say, there's always this desire to
they wanted the responses right away to understand what it is about.
We don't accept of architecture what we accept more from art, which is it's a challenge, it's a provocation. It's not clear what it is. It's even the idea that Gehry would know what it is ridiculous. It's a vast, complex organism, and maybe 50 years from now, there will be a very interesting young writer, and she will, for the first time, show us what really Gehry means. Or not. I mean, maybe 50 years from now, Gehry is just the least interesting person, like Prouvé was for a long time, you know. And here we are, like in the space where there was the big fire. Is that right? This building was.
Yes.
Yeah, nice.
It's like a kind of contemporary ruins of the 19th century.
Yeah, but I mean, my final thought is, I mean, there is Prouvé, right? We see it, we know it's Prouvé, it sits there. But we don't really know what it is, right? We are still amazed by it. And I think what's great to have an exhibition is to allow many, many people to look at it, think about it, compare it to their other work, generate some ideas. So I think that in that sense, LUMA can be a laboratory space where you place work and you will allow great diversity of opinions to develop, and if we're lucky, we end up still not knowing what Prouvé is, but loving it.
But
look at this. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same system. The folded metal, the angle. You know from 50 meters away, 100 meters away, that's Prouvé. Right? It's a signature.